Okay, I'd like now to recognize my good friend from California, Mr. Takano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. Chairman Wahlberg, the premise of his line of questioning was that private markets will correct bloat and bring down college costs. With the passage of the Republican budget bill, H.R. 1, Republicans laid out their vision for higher education clearly. They believe that college costs will be lowered through privatization, deregulation, and competition in the free market. Dr. Morgan, what do we know about college pricing and student outcomes in the for-profit sector?
Thank you for the question. So we know that college pricing in the for-profit sector is meant to maximize profits for shareholders rather than provide an affordable education for students. And so what we see in the for-profit sector is high prices, high levels of debt for students, and very little spending on instruction. So more often than not, we're seeing students who are getting a very high-price education that provides very poor outcomes in the labor market and in terms of their student debt repayment.
So in this case, does relying on a free market competition-based model effectively lower tuition?
These colleges are not competing on price for students, right? They are competing for access to federal aid dollars. They're competing for access to profits.
And there doesn't seem to be any attention to this particular sector in H.R. 1 or among your counterparts at the table.
No, in fact, H.R. 1 has very little attention to the issue of affordability overall, and in fact works in the opposite direction. It's increasing costs on families across the board, which is making it harder for them to afford higher education.
Thank you. Republicans seem to be operating on the theory that an increase in federal financial aid available to students leads to an increase in tuition for all. Dr. Morgan, in which sector of higher education has this theory been shown to be true? Public higher education, private higher education, or in the for-profit sector?
So the studies that I've reviewed have showed that in the for-profit sector, when there's an increase in financial aid, we see a corresponding increase in tuition prices. And that is, I believe, driven by this profit motive. They are looking to suck in as much federal financial aid as they can.
So an increase in financial aid has not been demonstrably been shown that for increases in public higher ed or in private higher education, but mainly in the for-profit sector.
No, certainly not to the same degree as the for-profit sector. I think the other thing to remember here is that even if federal financial aid were driving up tuition prices, the idea that simply limiting federal aid would somehow bring down tuition prices is a fallacy. What we're seeing is the creation of a gap between federal student loans and tuition prices that families are having to fill by turning to the private market for private student loans.
So H.R. 1 capped how much students could borrow in federal loans, limited student eligibility for Pell Grants, and fully replaced the student loan repayment system with one that is ultimately much more expensive for borrowers, changes which all increasingly pushed American students toward the private loan market. Dr. Morgan, will the changes made in H.R. 1 safeguard students against defaulting on their loans or exacerbate the risk of default?
They are certainly going to exacerbate the risk of default. I think in particular, the dialing back on the income-driven repayment plans available to people to give them a less generous option puts students at risk of default, but also shifting them over to the private market for loans puts many, many students at risk of default, and it puts them at risk of default on a loan that is more predatory than what they would have gotten in the federal system.
So my Republican colleagues say that greater privatization in higher education will protect the American taxpayer from subsidizing student loans. But without corresponding protections for student borrowers and accountability measures, the private markets will have free rein to treat these students like piggy banks. Dr. Morgan, we are accelerating American students towards the brink of a massive default crisis at a breakneck speed. What will a default crisis ultimately cost the American taxpayer?
I can't put an exact figure on it, but I just really want to emphasize that this is the crisis in defaults and even just in delinquencies isn't just an impact on the individual borrower, it's an impact on the economy as a whole. It inhibits people's job mobility, it inhibits their ability to get housing, and it inhibits their ability to consume, which is what powers our economy altogether. So this is really a crisis that we all need to be paying attention to, and that's happening right under our nose, even in the federal student loan program.
I'm afraid to say that my Republican colleagues want to take a victory lap today, but I want to warn all Americans that these policies that they have embedded in H.R. 1 are going to create a default crisis that will leave every American footing the bill. I yield back.